Hey everyone, quick thing before we dive in. I was looking at my analytics and it turns out most of the people watching aren't actually subscribed. See this? Way more views than subscribers. If you're enjoying the videos and want to see more, hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow and you'll never miss new uploads. Alright, let's get into it.
Day 1. The first thing I knew was the ache. It was a deep, thrumming pain that started in my skull and radiated down my spine, settling like lead in my limbs. I opened my eyes to a canopy of emerald green, a dizzying fractal of leaves and branches against a bruised twilight sky. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, pine needles, and something else, something ancient and loamy, like a cellar that had been sealed for centuries. I sat up, my head swimming. My name is Alex. I was a survival instructor. I spent more time in the wilderness than most people have spent in their own backyards. But this place, this wasn't a wilderness I knew. I pushed myself to my feet, my muscles screaming in protest. I wore simple, sturdy clothes, cargo pants, a thermal shirt, hiking boots. My pockets were empty. No knife, no compass, no fire starter. Nothing. Just the clothes on my back and the gnawing dread coiling in my gut. Panic is a luxury you can't afford when you're alone. I suppressed the tremor in my hands and did the first thing any lost person should do: get a vantage point. I picked the tallest, most climbable tree nearby, a gnarled giant whose bark was rough enough to offer good purchase. The climb was grueling. My body felt weak, unused, but adrenaline is its own kind of fuel. As I broke through the upper canopy, my heart, which had been hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, seemed to stop altogether. I saw nothing but trees, an unending, undulating sea of green stretching to every horizon, dissolving into a hazy mist at the edges of sight. There were no mountains, no rivers, no break in the suffocating monotony of the forest. It was an ocean, and I was adrift in its depths. The world felt wrong, tilted on an impossible axis. I wasn't just lost, I was erased. Descending the tree, a new feeling replaced the panic, a cold, hard resolve. I was a survivalist. This was the ultimate test. I would live. I would find a way out. The first night was a lesson in humility. Without a tool to build a shelter or a spark to make a fire, I was just another animal cowering in the dark. I found a small clearing, a place where the trees seemed to hold their breath, and huddled at the base of a thick oak. As true darkness fell, the forest came alive. It wasn't the familiar chorus of crickets and owls. It was a symphony of the strange. Skittering sounds from too many legs, guttural clicks from unseen throats, and a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate up from the soil itself. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. Sometime near the deepest point of the night, I felt it, a presence. I didn't see anything at first, just a subtle shift in the darkness at the edge of the clearing. Then 2 points of pale, luminous green blinked into existence. They weren't eyes. They were more like phosphorescent fungi, glowing with a sickly light. They hung in the air, unblinking, watching me. I held my breath, my body rigid. These were the glimmer moths. I didn't know their name then, of course. I just knew that their silent, unwavering gaze was a threat. They floated there for what felt like an eternity, judging me. Then, as if reaching a silent consensus, they began to drift away, their lights winking out one by one, leaving me alone in a darkness that felt somehow heavier than before. I didn't understand it then, but I had just survived my first test. The forest was watching, and for now, it had let me be.
Day 7. I'd gotten better at not dying, which wasn't the same thing as living. I found water, a stream that ran black as coffee and tasted like pennies, but it hadn't killed me yet.
I'd learned which roots wouldn't make me vomit blood, which bark I could chew without my tongue going numb. I survived the first week on grubs, edible roots I recognized, and a grim determination. My hands were raw from stripping bark and sharpening sticks with sharp-edged stones. I fashioned a crude spear, its point hardened in the embers of my first precious fire, which I'd managed to create with a friction bow after 2 days of frustrating, painstaking work. But holding something sharp, something I made, it helped a little. The forest provided, in its twisted way, but it took, too. The things that hunted here didn't follow normal rules. There were the pale lights, I called them watchers now, that appeared when something worse was coming. When I saw them, I knew to find the thickest tree, the deepest shadow, and pray to whatever god might still listen in this place. Then there were the snappers, creatures like oversized land-bound crabs with mottled bark-like shells. They moved in silence, their pincers clicking softly, and could lie in wait, half buried in the leaf litter. One burst from the ground as I was foraging, its claw narrowly missing my leg. I'd learned to watch the ground, to test each step. Then there were the screamers. Christ, the screamers. They sounded human. That was the worst part. Perfect human voices calling for help, crying in pain, begging to be found. The first time I heard one, a woman's voice, sobbing, I almost ran toward it. Something held me back. Maybe instinct, maybe the way the crying repeated exactly, same pitch, same words like a broken recording. I saw one 2 days ago. Tall as a man, but wrong, all wrong. Its limbs bent in places they shouldn't, and when it opened its mouth to scream, I saw rows of teeth like broken glass. It stood at the edge of my pathetic camp, just beyond the light of my fire, and cried with a little girl's voice for 3 straight hours. They hunted in packs, using their screams to disorient and terrify their prey. On the 5th night, a pack of them descended on my camp. I brandished my fire-hardened spear and a burning torch, screaming my own rage back at them. The fire held them at bay, their intelligent eyes gleaming with malevolent hunger just beyond its reach. They circled my camp for hours, their chorus of screams tearing at my sanity, before finally melting back into the woods. Day 8. By the beginning of the 2nd week, I had a routine: survive the day, endure the night. I had a small, defensible camp near a stream, a lean-to shelter, and a perpetually smoldering fire. I was a ghost haunting this alien landscape, my existence a fragile thread. But today, everything changed. I was tracking a snapper, hoping for a meal, when I saw him. He was tall and cloaked in a robe of woven moss and dark leather, his face obscured by the deep shadow of a hood. In his hand, he held a gnarled staff that pulsed with a faint, sickly green light. He moved with an unsettling silence, his feet making no sound on the forest floor. But it was the feeling he gave off that made my gut clench. Pure, concentrated wrongness, like standing next to an open grave, like touching something that had been dead for weeks. The air around him seemed colder, thicker. Even the trees leaned away from him. He carried a staff that pulsed with the same sickly green light as the watchers. At his belt, I caught the glint of metal, a knife, an axe, real tools. Tools that could mean the difference between surviving and becoming food for whatever lurked in the deep places of this forest. My survivalist instinct screamed at me. He hadn't seen me. I melted behind a tree, my heart pounding. Was he human? He stopped near a circle of blackened stones, muttering in a language that sounded like cracking branches and whispering wind. He raised his staff and the ground trembled. He was performing some kind of ritual. I stalked him for a full day, learning his patterns. He was alone. He moved with purpose, checking several of these strange stone circles. As dusk fell, I made my move. He had stopped to rest, his back to a thicket of ferns where I lay hidden. I had my spear, its point now honed to a deadly sharpness. I would make this quick. I crept up behind him, spear raised, every muscle coiled tight. He must have heard something. He started to turn, his hooded face swinging toward me. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of what was under that hood. Eyes like holes burned in parchment, skin the color of old bone. I drove the spear into his shoulder with everything I had. He made a sound, not quite human, not quite animal, more like wind through a broken flute. He stumbled, the green light of his staff flickering and dying, then collapsed. I stood over him panting, my heart hammering against my ribs. He wasn't dead. I could see his chest rising and falling, but he was out. The knife was beautiful, its edge sharp enough to split hairs. The axe was perfectly balanced, its head dark with what I hoped was rust. I was no longer a defenseless scavenger. I was armed. As I stripped him of his tools, I noticed a strange, intricately carved wooden charm around his neck. On impulse, I took that too. He also had a small leather-bound journal with a pen attached to it, took it as well. I left his body to the forest and retreated to the safety of my camp, my new axe held tight in my hand. Victory tasted like ash in my mouth, but it was victory nonetheless. That night, for the first time since I'd arrived in this place, I felt something like hope.
The next few days were a blur of industry.
With the axe, I built a real shelter, a small, sturdy log cabin with a defensible doorway and a proper hearth. I felled trees, cleared the underbrush, and set snares. I hunted the snappers and even managed to take down a lone screamer with the knife. I was no longer just enduring the forest, I was carving out a piece of it for myself. But my actions had not been unnoticed.
Day 11. They came for me. 3 of them this time, moving through the forest like shadows given form. I was in my shelter, with thick walls and a door I could bar from the inside. I thought I was safe. I was wrong. Through the gaps in the logs, I could see them circling my cabin like wolves. Their staves glowed with that sickly green light, but they weren't chanting or weaving spells. They were examining my defenses, looking for weaknesses. These weren't mystical guardians, they were killers, and they'd come to finish what I'd started. The first one drew a curved knife from his belt, its blade gleaming in the staff light. He tested the door with the tip, probing the wood, while the other 2 spread out to either side of the cabin. I pressed my back against the rear wall, axe in one hand, the stolen knife in the other, listening to them move around my shelter. Their feet made no sound on the forest floor, but I could hear them breathing, slow, controlled, patient. They had all night. That's when I smelled the smoke. At first, I thought it was just the dying embers of my fire pit. Then the smell grew stronger, sharper. Burning wood, fresh wood, my wood. I peered through a crack in the logs and saw one of them piling dry branches against the side of my cabin, while another struck flint to tinder. The third stood watch at the door, staff held like a club, waiting for me to come out. They were gonna burn me out, smoke me like meat in a smokehouse, then finish me when I fled choking and half blind from the flames. The fire caught with a hungry crackle. Orange light began to dance across the walls inside my cabin. The smell of smoke grew thick, and I could hear the flames beginning to lick at the logs I'd spent weeks cutting and fitting together. My sanctuary was becoming my tomb. I had 2 choices: burn alive or fight. I chose to fight. I waited until I heard them moving around to the back of the cabin, probably to set another fire. Then I lifted the bar and exploded through the door. The first one was right there, less than 3 feet away, his hooded face turning toward me in surprise. I drove my axe into his shoulder with all the force of desperation behind it. The blade bit deep, crunching through bone, and he screamed, the first human sound I'd heard from any of them. He staggered back, his staff falling from nerveless fingers, dark blood soaking through his robes, but he wasn't done.
His good hand whipped out that curved knife, slashing at my throat. I threw myself backward, feeling the blade whisper past my neck close enough to part the air. "Behind you!" my mind screamed, and I spun just as the second attacker's staff whistled through the air where my head had been. The impact with my raised axe sent shockwaves up both my arms, and I heard the wood crack. His staff wasn't just a mystic prop. It was solid hardwood, heavy as a baseball bat. He pressed his attack, swinging the staff in vicious overhead strikes that I barely managed to deflect. Each blow drove me back, my feet sliding in the loose earth. I could feel my strength failing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The third one appeared at my left, knife gleaming. I was caught between them, the flames of my burning cabin casting everything in hellish orange light. The staff wielder brought his weapon down in a crushing blow aimed at my skull. I rolled aside, and the staff buried itself in the soft earth. While he struggled to pull it free, I lashed out with my knife, opening a red line across his thigh. He howled and stumbled backward. But the first attacker was back on his feet, fighting one-handed, his shoulders streaming blood. He came at me in a frenzy, his knife weaving patterns in the air. I gave ground, parrying desperately, until my back hit the trunk of a massive oak. Nowhere to run. He lunged, and I caught his wrist, both of us straining against each other. His blood dripped onto my hands, making my grip slippery. His face was inches from mine now. I could see pale, sunken features under that hood, eyes like chips of ice, breath that stank of grave dirt. I drove my knee up into his ribs, felt something crack, and he doubled over. My axe came down on his back, and he collapsed face first into the dirt, motionless. The third one, the uninjured one, was backing away now. The killing fury was gone, replaced with something that looked almost like fear. He glanced at his two fallen companions, then back at me. Blood ran down my arms from a dozen small cuts. My cabin was fully ablaze now, the heat searing my back. I must have looked like some demon risen from hell, painted in firelight and gore. "You don't understand what you're doing, what you're going to unleash." "Then tell me," I snarled, raising my axe. "Stop trying to kill me and tell me." But he was already backing away, dragging his wounded leg. 99 nights. God help us all, you're gonna make it to 99 nights. He melted back into the forest, leaving his companions behind. I stood there shaking, my heart hammering against my ribs, watching my home burn to ash and ember. I'd won. But as I looked at the two motionless forms at my feet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just made a terrible mistake. The wounded one, the one I'd hit in the shoulder, stirred slightly, still breathing. I should have finished him, should have ended it. But something in those ice chip eyes had looked so human. Instead, I dragged both bodies to the edge of the clearing and left them there. By morning, they were gone. Whether they'd crawled away or something else had claimed them, I'd never know. But their blood remained, dark stains on the earth that the rain couldn't wash away.
Day 12. The screamers came that night. 3 of them, circling my pathetic shelter, their perfect human voices calling for help. A woman crying, a child lost and frightened, an old man pleading. For hours they kept it up, trying to break my will. But just as they started to close in, the wind picked up. Not a gentle breeze, a howling gale that came from nowhere, tearing at my small fire with invisible claws. I spent the entire night hunched over that dying flame, feeding it twigs and bark, my hands burned and bleeding from grabbing at scattered embers. Every time the wind died for a moment, I could hear them out there, waiting. Without the fire, I was dead. The wind only stopped when dawn came, and the screamers melted back into the forest. Day 20. I was cooking that day.
a streamy piece of meat from something that looked like a rat but had too many teeth. The smoke from my fire was rising straight up in a thin column when suddenly everything went still. Not quiet, still. The air became thick as soup, pressing against my face like a wet cloth. I couldn't breathe. Every time I tried to suck in air, it felt like drowning. The smoke from my fire stopped rising and just hung there, a gray cloud that burned my eyes and filled my lungs with poison. I stumbled away from the fire, gasping, my vision going dark at the edges. Just when I thought I was going to pass out, a breeze stirred the leaves above me. The smoke cleared. I could breathe again. But my food was ruined, and I went to bed hungry. Day 28. The rain started just as I picked up the trail of something big, tracks in the mud that might have meant fresh meat for a week. I'd been following them for hours when the sky opened up. Not a gentle shower, a deluge. Water came down in sheets so thick I couldn't see 5 feet ahead. The tracks I'd been following washed away in minutes. My clothes became sodden rags that clung to my skin and made every step a struggle. The ground turned to sucking mud that trapped my feet and nearly cost me my boots twice. I made it back to camp half drowned and shivering, empty-handed and with no idea if I'd even been walking in the right direction for the last 2 hours. Day 31. 3 days without rain by then. The stream was getting lower, muddier. I'd been rationing my water, allowing myself only a few sips at a time. My lips were cracked, my tongue felt like leather. The heat was unbearable. The canopy that usually blocked the sun seemed thin that day, letting down shafts of light that burned like focused fire. Sweat poured off me, but there was no relief. The air shimmered with heat that had nothing to do with summer, and breathing felt like sucking in flames. I tried to reach the stream to refill my water container, but when I got there, the familiar path ended in a wall of thorny undergrowth that definitely hadn't been there the day before. It took me 3 hours to find another way around, and by then the sun was setting, and the watchers were beginning to appear.
Day 35. I was climbing that day, trying to get high enough to spot the stream from above, when the branch snapped under my weight. It was thick as my waist, looked solid as stone, should have held me easily. Instead, it crumbled like rotten wood the moment I put my full weight on it. I fell 10 feet, landed hard on my back, and lay there gasping for 10 minutes before I could move. My ribs still ached, and there was a cut on my scalp that wouldn't stop bleeding. Day 38. The cold came without warning. I woke up that morning and could see my breath, even though the day before had felt like the inside of an oven. My fire had burned down to coals during the night, and when I tried to blow it back to life, the wind kept changing direction, blowing the smoke back in my face. My hands were so numb I could barely hold my axe to split kindling. Every breath felt like swallowing ice. By the time I got a proper fire going, I couldn't feel my toes, and my teeth were chattering so hard I thought they might crack. The cold lasted until noon, then vanished as suddenly as it had come. By evening, I was sweltering again. Day 42. Another path that led nowhere. I'd walked that route a dozen times. It should have led to the grove where I sometimes found edible roots. Instead, it curved left where it should have gone straight, then divided into 3 smaller paths that all seemed to wind back on themselves. I spent the entire day walking in what I thought was a straight line, only to emerge from the undergrowth 50 yards from where I started. My own footprints were there in the dirt, mocking me. The forest was rearranging itself around me, and I was starting to wonder if I was losing my mind. Day 45. The attacks came every few nights by then, but it wasn't just the creatures anymore. It was also the warlocks, never more than 2, and thankfully never close combat like before. I'd turned my rebuilt cabin into a fortress, sharpened stakes driven into the ground, pit traps covered with branches and leaves, tripwires that triggered crude alarms made from clattering stones. But the worst part wasn't the attacks. It was what happened between them. The forest was changing, growing worse. The trees were taller then, their bark darker, weeping that red sap constantly. The air was thicker, harder to breathe, and it carried new smells. Rotting meat, burning hair, something sweet and cloying like flowers left too long in a closed room. And the humming had started. It was barely audible at first, just a vibration you felt more than heard, but it was getting louder, deeper. It came from everywhere, the ground, the trees, the air itself. Sometimes, late at night when the attacks had stopped and the forest had gone quiet, I could swear I heard something vast and patient stirring in the deep places, something that had been sleeping for a very long time, something that was starting to wake up. Day 67. I made a mistake that day, a big one. I found another one of their stone circles, hidden deep in a grove where the trees grew so thick their canopy blocked out all light. The stones were different this time, taller, covered in those writhing symbols, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. At the center stood a pillar of black stone, its surface polished to a mirror shine. The wooden charm I'd taken from the first hooded figure grew warm against my chest as I approached, almost hot enough to burn. I was tired of being hunted, tired of barely surviving, tired of living in constant fear. I wanted to hit back, to hurt them the way they'd been hurting me. I raised my axe and brought it down on the pillar with everything I had. The stone didn't crack. It exploded. A wave of green fire erupted from the shattered pillar, throwing me back 20 feet. The blast echoed through the forest like thunder, and in response came a sound that made my bones vibrate, a deep, resonant groan from somewhere far below, as if the earth itself was in pain.
The effect was immediate and horrible. The trees around the circle began to wither and die, their leaves turning black and falling like poisoned snow. The ground became soft and spongy, oozing a thick, dark fluid that stank of decay. The humming I'd been hearing for weeks suddenly became a roar, a cacophony of sound that threatened to split my skull open. That night, I dreamed of him. A figure made of tangled roots and splintered wood, tall as a building, crowned with dead branches. Where his eyes should have been, there were only 2 points of malevolent starlight. And he was smiling. I woke up screaming, and for the first time since I'd arrived in this place, I understood what I'd really done. The stone circles weren't sources of their power. They were locks. And I'd just broken one. Day 85. The hooded figures were gone by then. I hadn't seen them in 2 weeks. At first I thought maybe I'd won. Maybe breaking their ritual site had driven them off. But as the days passed and the forest grew worse, the trees bleeding constantly now, the air thick with the stench of rot, the humming so loud I could barely think, I realized the truth. They weren't my enemies. They were wardens, guardians, the only thing standing between this world and something infinitely worse. And I'd been fighting them. The attacks had stopped, but that wasn't because I was safe. It was because they were busy elsewhere, fighting a battle I couldn't see, trying to hold back whatever I'd helped set free. The wooden charm around my neck was burning by then, searing my skin even through my shirt. Sometimes I caught glimpses of things moving in the forest, shapes too big to be real, shadows that didn't match the trees that cast them. The air shimmered with heat that had nothing to do with temperature, and when I closed my eyes, I could see him more clearly each time. He who walks among the trees. That was his name. I didn't know how I knew it, but I did. It came to me in whispers carried on the wind, in the groaning of the dying trees, in the steady rhythm of that terrible humming that never stopped. I tried to remember the warlock's words to me during the first attack. God help us all, you're going to make it to 99 nights. But I was starting to think survival wasn't the point anymore. I was starting to think I was never meant to escape this place at all. I was meant to be here, to last exactly 99 nights, to be the key that turned the lock. Day 99. The sun doesn't set tonight. The sky has been that same bruised purple for hours now, streaked with veins of red like infected wounds. The humming stopped an hour ago, replaced by a silence so complete it makes my ears ring. The forest is holding its breath. I can see them now at the edge of the clearing. The three hooded figures, standing perfectly still, their faces finally visible in the strange, sourceless light. They're human. Just men, their lines with exhaustion and unspeakable sorrow. They're not looking at me. They're looking behind me. The ground is shaking. Not the violent tremors of an earthquake, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of massive footsteps. With each step, the trees part, not breaking or falling, but simply bending aside, creating a path from the heart of the forest. I turn around, and I see him. He who walks among the trees towers above the canopy, his form too vast for my mind to process completely. Each step is thunder, each movement the groaning of a world in its death throes. His wooden face is a maze of knots and grain, and his eyes, God, his eyes burn with the light of dying stars. The lead warden looks at me, and I see no anger in his face, no hatred, only pity so profound it breaks something inside me. 99 nights. The ritual is complete.
I understand now. I was never lost in this forest. I was brought here, chosen. All my struggling, all my fighting, all my stubborn refusal to die. It was never about survival. It was about lasting long enough. The forest was a prison, and I was the key. My presence here, my defiance, my will to live in the face of impossible horror, it was all part of the lock. And after 99 nights, 99 perfect nights of terror and desperation and clinging to life by my fingernails, the lock is finally open. He who walks among the trees raises one massive hand, and I can see the world ending in his palm. Not in fire or flood, but in the slow, patient hunger of the deep forest. In roots that will crack every foundation, in vines that will pull down every building, in the green darkness that will swallow every light. But something strange is happening. I should be terrified. I should be running. Instead, I feel calm. There's a pull, gentle but irresistible, drawing me forward. I have to go to him. My hand is shaking as I write this. I can barely hold the charcoal steady. But I need to finish this. I need to... The final entry ends abruptly mid-sentence. This leather-bound journal was discovered at an abandoned campsite approximately 30 miles from the Blackwood Trail, along with the personal effects of missing hiker Alex Morrison. The journal appears to be very old, its pages filled with Morrison's handwriting, though Forest Service records show no evidence of the extensive fortifications described in his account. Local authorities have classified this as an elaborate hoax,
possibly created during a psychological break brought on by wilderness isolation. However, they cannot explain how Morrison's other gear, including a high-quality steel axe and knife of unknown manufacture, came to be at the site, or why the journal shows no signs of weather damage despite being exposed to the elements. The Blackwood Trail remains closed to hikers. 3 additional hikers have been reported missing in the surrounding forest.